I want to take you live now, half past the hour, to Dover Air Force Base, where President Trump will undertake one of the most solemn duties facing the commander-in-chief when he will witness the dignified transfer for 2 Iowa National Guard members killed in the attack in the Syrian desert. This is the ritual happening live now, Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, where they will honor the U.S. service members who were killed in action. John, we take this in as a country. And we honor those lives that have been lost.
Yep, and there you see Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, together with the chairman of the Air National Guard, the Air Force General, as we await the remains of 3 brave people, 2 of our soldiers who were killed in Syria, the 3rd, an interpreter of Iraqi origin who has been living in the United States. The soldiers are Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard of Marshalltown, Iowa. He was previously deployed to Kosovo in 2020, and Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar of Des Moines. The transfer cases containing their remains will be coming out of that C-17, which we should point out is from the West Virginia Air National Guard. And of course, the Army National Guard of West Virginia had that tragic incident, that terror attack in Washington, D.C. the day before Thanksgiving, where one brave National Guard member, Sarah Beckstrom, was shot in the head and killed. The other, Andrew Wolf, recovering from his wounds in what many people have described as a miraculous recovery at the Washington MedStar Health Center. Let's bring in our reporter panel, Trey Yingst in Tel Aviv, Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon, and Rich Edson at the White House. And Trey, let's start with you because you've spent so much time in that part of the world. It was believed, and Mike Pompeo said this the other day, that we thought that we had turned a corner on ISIS, that they were being held at bay. Yet here we had a member of the Syrian forces who were working in conjunction with the American forces suddenly go rogue. Apparently he had expressed extremist views and was about to be fired from his position and opened fire at this joint meeting of Syrian and U.S. officials, killing 3 people.
Yeah, John, I spoke with a Syrian official this week who indicated the gunman had joined Syria's internal security forces just 2 months ago, and he was currently under investigation for ties to ISIS. You might remember back in 2017, the United States supported forces on the ground to defeat and destroy the Islamic State. But there have been pockets of this terrorist organization and also lone gunmen that agree with its ideology who have launched similar attacks. And so this meeting was taking place over the weekend between U.S. officials and Syrian officials when the gunman opened fire. Ultimately, partner forces returned fire, killing that gunman, but not before these 2 Iowa National Guardsmen, their interpreter, were killed, and 3 others from the National Guard were wounded. As we look at this story, though, it's important to put it in context to what it means on the ground in Syria. President Trump made very clear this week that the Syrian government of Ahmed al-Shara that took over control of Syria just a year ago had nothing to do with this shooting. He said that they have expressed support to try and stabilize the security situation on the ground in Syria, and that is why American forces are there, to ensure that ISIS doesn't rear its head again and try to spread this Islamic radical ideology across the Middle East.
Jennifer Griffin is with us now. Thank you, Trey. President Trump, Jennifer, traveled to Dover several times, as we remember, in his first term. He once described this event as the toughest thing I have to do as president. Jen, your thoughts?
Well, Sandra, it absolutely is. I've talked to people who have gone to these dignified transfers, as they're called, at Dover, and speaking to the families before the flag-draped caskets are brought out and escorted to the families and handed over to the families is very emotional. Sometimes presidents are attacked by the family members. Sometimes they are just so bereft that the president has to sit with them for a long, long period of time. So this is a very emotional ceremony. And what we can tell you about the Iowa National Guard soldiers who were serving in Syria, there are about 1,000 U.S. soldiers still in Syria as part of that counter-ISIS mission, and about 200 of them are from the Iowa National Guard. Sergeant Torres Tovar was just 25 years old, of Des Moines, Iowa, and Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard was 29 years old. His father is the police chief of the Meskwaki Nation, about 60 miles northeast of Des Moines. This is, again, very, very hard on the families. We heard from the father of Sergeant Howard, who spoke about the devotion of his son to service. He had served in Kosovo, as John mentioned. He is going to be escorted by his younger brother, Staff Sergeant Howard, who also serves in the Iowa National Guard.
In fact, Jan, I have the statement from Police Chief Jeffrey Bunn, the Meskwaki Nation police chief, who said, quote, "Our son Nate was one of the soldiers that paid the ultimate sacrifice for all of us to keep us all safer. He loved what he was doing and would be the first in and last out, no one left behind. Please pray for our soldiers all around this cruel world. We will see you again, son. Until then, we have it from here." Rich, Edson, this is a scene that we have seen far too many times in this nation as a solemn ceremony, as the remains of these American heroes come home for the last time.
It has, John, and also when it comes to deaths in the National Guard family, just over the last few weeks here, of course, there was the attack here in Washington, D.C., and as you had mentioned, the president has previously called this the toughest thing that he has to do. With the president today, you have the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, his Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, also with him, the former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. On the schedule for today was the First Lady, though a White House official says at the last minute the First Lady could no longer attend this solemn event. The President of the United States, as the Commander-in-Chief, there is a sense of responsibility there. There are troops stationed all over the world at the request of the Defense Department and the President of the United States, and so there very much is a sense of responsibility at the White House when you have to do these types of events. And as Jen pointed out, emotionally they can go very different ways at Dover Air Force Base, given family members. So this solemn event ongoing here now, and there are also questions on the Middle East. The fact that this is an ISIS attack and that that still remains a major challenge for the Western world and the world in the region. On top of that, also, there are questions about the government in Syria. President Ahmed al-Shara, who was here in Washington, D.C., who's been welcomed by the President of the United States, who the President said had nothing to do with this attack, was a one-time leader of an Islamic insurgent group, pushing to say that he has moved past that life and is now a legitimate president, interim president there in Syria. But there are major flashpoints and questions ongoing in that region and through these storylines as to what the future holds for Syria and the greater region.
To Trey now. Trey, if you could rejoin here, the two guardsmen killed in Syria, Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, 25 years old, of Des Moines, Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, 29 years old, of Marshalltown, according to the U.S. Army. Both were members of the 1st Squadron, 113th Cavalry Regiment. The men have been hailed heroes by the Iowa National Guard. The U.S. civilian working as an interpreter, identified as Ayad Mansour Sakat of Macomb, Michigan, was also killed. 3 other members of the Iowa National Guard were injured in that attack. The Pentagon has not identified them, but they were among hundreds of U.S. troops, as we know, Trey, deployed in eastern Syria as part of the coalition fighting the Islamic State group.
Yes, Andrew, look, these soldiers are heroes, and they are receiving a hero's welcome home. This is just such a tragic moment for their families, and the honor that they will receive right now is so important. But when we look at the American forces on the ground in the Middle East, it is far reduced than what it used to be at the height of the Islamic State when ISIS controlled cities in both Iraq and Syria. President Trump has been very clear that he wants to draw down U.S. forces in the Middle East, specifically in these two countries, despite the fact that the U.S. is continuing as a member and a leader in part of the anti-ISIS coalition. The challenging part with fighting ISIS is just how splintered the organization is. It doesn't take a specific cell. It just takes a lone gunman, one terrorist, like we saw over the weekend, to lead to the deaths of American service members or civilians in these areas. And that is part of what the Americans have been doing on the ground, not only sharing intelligence with local forces, but also acting as a training force to ensure that they can conduct these missions individually. And again, what we understand is that there was a meeting taking place when this terrorist attack took place, and this lone gunman opened fire on these brave Iowa National Guardsmen. When we look at the future of the region, this certainly will bring up ongoing conversations about U.S. troop presence in the region. Again, when we look back at recent history, back to 2016 and 2017, when the Islamic State was facing a serious ground operation from SDF forces and also that support from the American coalition on the ground. Things have changed, and it is a much different Middle East. And as we have seen, the United States has the over-the-horizon capabilities to strike when necessary. And again, it raises these questions about the need and location of American forces on the ground. But again, President Trump wanted to express his condolences earlier in the week. He spoke at a Hanukkah ceremony at the White House about these brave service members, talking about their sacrifice for the country and also their efforts, again, to help in this mission to defeat and destroy ISIS. We saw just this weekend, the Islamic State around the world continues to launch attacks, not just against soldiers, but also against civilians. And it is a very important mission to ensure that they are destroyed, but it's a very difficult mission. And these soldiers, these brave Iowa National Guardsmen, lost their lives during this mission.
You know, Jen, what happened on Saturday at the so-called green on blue attack, we have seen it happen several times in the past, most notably, I guess, in Afghanistan. And again, it was thought that the threat from ISIS had been diminished somewhat. But if a local, whether it be local military or local police force, some sort of local military force personnel becomes radicalized, it's very difficult to root these out before they happen.
Well, it's very interesting that the Syrian security forces and the Syrian Ministry of Interior had actually figured out that this person who had joined the forces, the Syrian forces, just 2 months before, had been in contact with ISIS, and they were suspicious, and they had alerted him that he was under investigation and possibly being kicked out of the security forces. So that may have, in fact, triggered the attack. It's also important, John, to point out what the U.S. forces are doing on the ground in Syria, and to remind our viewers that there are still 5,000 to 7,000 ISIS fighters in Iraq and Syria, along with tens of thousands of their family members and fighters who are in 2 camps in northeastern Syria. And that is what the U.S. is working with Syrian defense forces, the allied Kurdish forces, to try and contain. If they were to leave and those camps were to be opened up, you would have a metastasis of a spreading out of ISIS across not only the Middle East, but possibly into Europe and abroad. So those tens of thousands of people who are in those camps, that is a residual effect of the 14-year civil war, the destruction of ISIS and the Islamic State under the first Trump administration. And right now, they're not clear what to do with those people. And what the colonel who was meeting with the other Syrian security forces in Palmyra when this attack occurred, they were having lunch at the time. When that occurred, it was to discuss how to bring the new Syrian security forces, the army, together with the SDF so that they could actually fight against the ISIS, the remnants of ISIS, and the U.S. would not have to be in the lead there.
Rich, we just saw the soldiers walk onto the C-17. Just describing the process we are about to see. The transfer cases, we expect 3 of them to come off the C-17 aircraft. They will be draped with the American flag, holding the remains of the fallen soldiers. You're seeing President Trump there now live. They will then, the transfer cases, be carried from military aircraft to an awaiting vehicle. And we watch this solemn moment together. Rich, just to take our viewers through what we're about to see, the vehicles will then transport them to the mortuary facility at the base where the fallen service members are then prepared for their final resting place. Do share your thoughts as we await the transfer cases.
Right, and what we'll also see here, Sandra, is there will be 2 transfer teams. The first team will carry the first 2 transfer cases for the National Guardsmen. The second transfer team will carry the 3rd case because, of course, the 3rd case is the civilian who was the interpreter killed in this, Ayad Mansour of Macomb, Michigan. After a service member has been identified and prepared for return to their family, they're placed in a casket and transported to their final resting place. That all according to the pool that is traveling with the president and getting this information from the Department of Defense. As you know, we have said, this is something that President Trump has described as the toughest thing he's had to do, and he's had to do it again. As Jen had said, describing the situation ongoing in Syria, in Iraq for the last decade and a half right now, it has been a hotbed of not only ISIS, but there are also Iranian forces there. There have been opposition parties to what was then the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. There are also Russian forces there. So this has been an area that has not had much control over it for some time now, since the Arab Spring back in the early part of the 2010s, and it remains a problem for the world and for the region and the United States to figure out exactly how they're going to deal with it.
Let's take a moment here, and there will be silence as we watch the transfer. As we saw the remains of Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard transferred from the C-17 to the awaiting vehicle, we now await the transfer of the remains of Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar. We should point out for folks at home that we cannot broadcast audio. We can also not show pictures of the families. So that's why when we observe the transfer case being brought out of the back of the C-17, while you're hearing complete silence, and that's why we do not follow the transfer case all the way to the awaiting vehicle, because that's, I assume, where the family is staged. As we await the transfer of the second set of remains, as the transfer group from the Iowa National Guard go back into the belly of the C-17 to retrieve the remains. Let's bring in Mike Surrey, retired Navy SEAL and host of Unsung Arlington on Fox Nation. Mike, your thoughts as we watch this dignified transfer?
Well, John, you keep using the word solemn, and it couldn't be more accurate. You know, Dover is known as the place where our heroes come home. And these dignified transfers are relatively modern. The official term came into use in the 80s and 90s. And as you mentioned, media can't show the family, but the media was restricted until 2009. That lift was banned by President Obama, and for good reason. This is our way of keeping the faith and honoring those Americans' service and sacrifice, and letting our country watch. It's also a reminder, and this is a big one, that service doesn't end with anonymity. These soldiers, these warriors, these great Americans had names. Sergeant Torres Tovar and Sergeant Howard of the 1st Squadron, 113th Cavalry Regiment, and their names will live in infamy.
And let's pause for a moment as the transfer case is now moved out of the C-17 and toward the vehicle.
Mike, we understand that the latest transfer case taken from the C-17 was Sergeant Edgar Torres Tovar, 1st Squadron, 113th Cavalry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team, 34th Infantry Division of the Iowa National Guard, Boone, Iowa. His hometown, Des Moines, Iowa, Mike.
Yes. And, you know, you can only imagine the weight, and I think you can see it in President Trump's face as well as the Secretary of War. This is their opportunity to look in the family and take accountability, because this happened under their watch and they feel that weight. But also to let those families know that we're with them, we're weeping and praying with them, and that their sons will not be forgotten. And so this ceremony is solemn indeed. And, you know, all I can hope is that as many Americans pause for a few minutes on days like this and watch.
We should point out that messages of condolences have come from, obviously, many different areas of the military. This is from Major General Stephen Osborne, who's the Adjutant General of the Iowa National Guard, who said they were dedicated professionals and cherished members of our Guard family who represented the best of Iowa. Our focus now is providing unwavering support to their families through this unimaginable time and ensuring the legacy of these two heroes is never forgotten. You see the Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds there between the President and the Secretary of War. Kim Reynolds said the following: Sergeant Howard and Sergeant Torres Tovar served our state and nation with honor, and in doing so gave the ultimate sacrifice. We are grateful for their service and deeply mourn their loss. We should say that this is a significant loss for the Iowa National Guard. The last time a member of the Guard was killed in action was 2011 in Afghanistan, as we now watch the transfer case containing the remains of the interpreter Ayad Mansour Sakat removed from the C-17. He is of Iraqi origin. He's lived in the United States for several years. He worked with the United States Army back in Iraq 2003 to 2007. So, Mike, he's one of those brave Iraqis that really risked a lot to work with the United States.
Not all heroes wear uniforms, and this is a perfect example. And all the interpreters and soldiers we served alongside in Iraq and Afghanistan, their sacrifice is as equal to those that wear the uniform. So it is only right that we honor them as well and the sacrifice they made for our freedom.
You know, I did 3 tours of duty in Iraq as a journalist, of course. And everywhere we went, whether it was with the 172nd Stryker Brigade or with the 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion or elements of the 4th ID, everywhere we went, there was an Iraqi interpreter who was definitely risking life and limb to aid the U.S. military. So hats off to all of them who gave such yeoman duty in the face of danger and in the face of so many odds against them at that time.
Okay, let's bring Jennifer Griffin back in, our chief national security correspondent, as we saw the 3rd Dignified transfer take place just moments ago. Jen?
Well, just to pick up on something that John said, the interpreter whose casket was the 3rd that came, case came from the airplane draped in a U.S. American flag, he was most likely here in the U.S. brought from Iraq on a special immigrant visa. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of interpreters over the 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan who qualified for those special immigrant visas. Some of them feel very insecure right now because there has been talk about whether they would be able to stay here in the United States. So to see the dedication of someone like this individual who lives in Michigan, who's gone over to Syria to serve again in the fight against ISIS, is really quite moving. And of course, the families of Sergeant Torres Tovar and Sergeant Howard are now awaiting these flag drape cases. They will be taken, the members of the Iowa National Guard will be taken back to Iowa for burial. We understand that one of the 3 injured members of the Iowa National Guard has returned to duty. The 2 others were taken to a base in Jordan where they were being treated for their injuries.
All right, thank you, Jen. John?
Well, let's bring in retired Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, an Army veteran and Black Hawk helicopter pilot. You've been to a lot of very dangerous places in the world, and Syria was one that we knew was dangerous, but we didn't know ISIS would be the threat that it continues to be, Darren. I mentioned earlier, Mike Pompeo said that we had thought that we had turned the corner on ISIS. Clearly not.
Yeah, hey, John, thank you. Yeah, turning the corner on ISIS is one of those things that seems like it's just going to always be there, because what you're doing is you're really fighting an ideology that is always going to advocate violent extremism, and it's hard to tell, the difference between an ISIS and anybody else throughout Syria and the Middle East is very difficult. Lone actors are going to be ideologically aligned with ISIS in many ways and be able to claim that they weren't part of an organization, but they were just in support of them. So, the question then becomes, Does the constant fear of a resurgent ISIS or a caliphate pursuit or similar things cause us to need to keep American soldiers in places like Syria? Is the risk worth the potential reward or the need there for actual stability? Those are questions I think need to truly be answered, not just in Syria, but in other countries throughout the Middle East, where we're putting soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and many others at risk. And I think a full analysis needs to be done of all that, but that does not diminish the heroism and the service of these service members who only did exactly what they were told to do.
Thank you very much for that. I want to bring Rich Edson back in as we continue to watch this solemn event live out of Dover Air Force Base there in Delaware. Rich, please do tell us what happens now with this event.
Well, from here, Sandra, the troops will go to another part of the base. They will be prepared then to be brought home to Iowa and their final resting place. You have not seen any family members on video. That's very much a part of this ceremony. National news networks are banned from showing families. This is really only what's contained in the shot you're seeing there. That on top of the government dignitaries. You saw Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa standing there, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware standing there, along with all the other dignitaries and government officials that we have listed and talked about earlier. And then from here, President Trump will return to the White House and give an economic address at 9 p.m. tonight. A recap of the first year as the White House, as you have talked to Caroline Levitt about it here on your show. It really goes to show you just the different facets and the different pressures and what's really important when you are President of the United States. You attend an event like this that puts the sharpest focus on what Americans and allies are doing all around the world and are putting their lives at risk and are coming home, sometimes in ceremonies like this. And you see the President of the United States and the Secretary of War there saluting as this ceremony begins to come to an end. And the President will then leave Dover Air Force Base back to the White House.
This dignified transfer, this dignified ceremony, this solemn ceremony occurred so many times between the years 2001 and 2016, 2017, I mean, even all the way through until 2021 for the Afghanistan withdrawal. Blessedly, it doesn't happen as often as it did in the past. But of course, we have this solemn ceremony now. There was the ceremony when the service members who were killed in the Abbey Gate bombing were brought home. So even though this solemn ceremony does not take place as often as it was in recent years, it is still happening. And that is a reminder, again, that freedom is not free, that our brave men and women of the U.S. military put their lives on the line each and every day. And we need to thank them for the sacrifice they, and as importantly, their families make. Because you can imagine the sacrifice that this family is feeling now, particularly at the holiday season, as they bring back the remains of their loved ones. Sandra?
And you just think about the young lives lost. Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, just 25 years old. Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, 29. They'll go back to their final resting place. We pray for them and their families. And we also say goodbye to Ayed Mansour Sakat of Macomb, Michigan, the U.S. civilian working as an interpreter. And we thank them for their service, John.
Yep, this is not the Christmas that these families wanted, but it is now what they are going to have to deal with, as they will forever remember their loved one and the service that they gave. Again, I thought that it was pretty profound when the Meskwaki Nation Police Chief Jeffrey Braun, who's the stepfather of Sergeant Nathaniel Howard, said, "We will see you again, son. Until then, we have it from here."
God bless them. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm John Roberts. Martha McCallum picks up our coverage as we go on with the story. Martha?
John and Sandra, thank you. This is one of the most solemn duties that a president undertakes, and we saw the cabinet members, including Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, as they oversaw the process of this dignified transfer of these three devoted members of the U.S. service, including one who was an interpreter Ayad Mansour Sakat, who was a U.S. civilian working as an interpreter. Also welcomed home were the bodies of Sergeant Edgar Brian Torres Tovar, 25 years old, of Des Moines, Iowa, and Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, 29, of Marshalltown. They were members of the 1st Squadron, 113th Cavalry Regiment. And this is, as you all have been saying in your coverage, just a very solemn, very difficult day for these families, no doubt.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.